All right, lesson one, style guide. So in this lesson, we'll build something like this, which is the style guide for my website. So basically go through things like setting font sizes for headings, building a color scheme, and in this case, having some buttons and block quotes and other things I have styled in my blog. We'll do a little bit less for the course app, but a couple of nice things about doing it this way, even though it's some more upfront work, is it first makes you move faster through building your app when it's done. So applying the classes, the style classes that you create here to elements throughout the app or any app you create. And then the other nice thing is, since this will be a clonable pattern, if you decide to take it and use it in one of your own projects, it'll be much easier to go ahead and say you want to use a different color scheme than I used. Just change it on this page versus going through and changing colors or other styles on individual elements across the site. So let's get started. So we're going to create a new project, which is going to be the clonable course app. So now I'm in the studio and have my blank canvas. And the first thing I'll do is just click and drag the blank page onto the canvas and then give it a name. And so we're going to build the style guide first, so let's just call it that. So the first thing we're going to do is actually create a few styles that live on the body. So if you know HTML at all, this just goes into the body element on any page that we're going to use. And what I want to do here is go into the page properties, into styling, and I'm going to actually reselect this primary style class because I'm going to create my own, and then we're going to reuse that primary style class throughout the app on all my pages. So I have some built-in ones, but I'm going to create this new one, call it body styling, and I'm going to click on that. And so I'm just going to do a few things that I'm going to use throughout the course app on every page. You'll see here, this is how you create your styles. We'll get into responsive design later by putting things differently on different devices. And here to start, you can see Bildr has tons of options. So if I went down to this all props, you can essentially see anything that you can think of doing in CSS is already built in. So you can see your view of all your props, just the props that you're using. And then the nice thing too, if you like to get your hands dirty with CSS, you can actually go in here and type in your own or edit it. But for this course, we're not going to do that at all. We're just going to either use built-in classes or create our own through the UI. So the first property I want to add to all my body styles is just a base font size. And so you can just search for these things. Here's font size built in. I'll just type 16, hit enter. The first choice is going to be pixels. So that's ready to go. Then we'll do a font family. You can use some built-in fonts that Bildr has. You can also bring in any Google font you want. For now, or for this course, again, we'll just choose a family that exists because there are nice ones there. So I'm going to just take this first one, Cabin. And I think just one more thing. Yeah, I just want to do a simple kind of minimalist design and have just make sure my background color for every page is white. So I'll choose background color and then just use the hex code for white. 6 ifs. Yep. All right, let's start using elements. So I'm going to go back. So I'm on page properties. I can see that this page in its properties is now using that primary style class of body styling. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to start building things in this page. So I'm clicking the plus button where, as you saw in the overview, there's all the elements you can use. I'm going to search. I know the first thing I want to do is create a container. And this is a container I'm going to put my own details on because I'm going to use this container. It's going to have a consistent width and I'm going to use it throughout the app. That's going to help me keep things consistently aligned and also help with responsive design later. So when I click into that to edit it, I want to give this a unique name, and you'll see it's going to be a max width container of, I'm going to use 1140 pixels, kind of my preference. And then I'm going to get into the styling here. And so I'm going to start applying some classes. Now the difference between, you'll see apply utility classes. A utility class is something that already exists in Bildr that you can use, like there's stuff that's text align center that we're used, that's pre-existing, that's easy to just grab and apply. And then you can also create your own utility classes that you can then reuse later. And we'll do some of that. We'll also do some inline styling, which is putting some styling directly on an element that can't really be reused later. It's if you want to get pretty granular on an element without creating a utility class for it or for something else later. So this container, it's going to be its own class itself that I'm going to reuse. So I'm going to click in here. I'm going to create a new utility class and give it that same name. And then click into it to give it the properties I want on it. And so those properties are going to be starting at, we're going to give it a width of 100%. We're going to give it that max width of 1140 pixels. And then we're going to do some margins, auto margins on the left and the right, so that in that container everything's kind of centered by default. And again, as you can see, I'm just doing this strictly through this interface here. All right, so now we'll start building on the page. So I'm going to go back. And now what I want to do is I want to create some sections for this page. I think we're just going to have like a heading section at the top, and then typography, and then colors. I just want to give them some padding so there's some nice white space. So we're going to create something else that we're going to reuse within this page. So what I'm going to do is drag this here. And you can notice that because I did these out of order, section is now within this container, but I actually want to do the opposite. So it's easy to click and drag to put my container in the section. There we go. So on this section, I do want to give it some padding, but I don't want to override what they give me as a default section. So I'm going to create another utility class for myself. So give it that name, and then create it. I'm probably not going to use this same section throughout the app and just on this page. So I'm going to call it style guide. And then the only thing I'm going to do is giving some padding at the top and bottom. And I like to use 40. All right, let's bring on our first visible element. So now I've got that section, I've got that container, and I just want a heading for this page that says style guide, but we're actually going to create our H1 heading on there that we'll use in a bunch of different spots in the app. So this one, I'll give it a specific name. It's the heading to my style guide. I do want this to be an H1, so just in case we are worrying about SEO stuff, I'm going to make that H1, and then to easily just change what it says right here in the display text. You can do it here, or you can do it in the canvas by clicking into the actual element and typing. All right, so let's, like I said, use a utility class that already exists to center this. So just by searching, I know there's a text align center, but now I want my H1s to be a particular size, and I want them to be relative to that base font size of 16 pixels I put in my body styling. So I'm going to create my own No, I didn't need to do that, but I'll create my own, call it H1 heading. And then the only thing we're going to add to this as a property is the font size that's relative using EMs. And as an aside, I'm going to build a resources page as part of this course. So, and they'll be aligned with each lesson. And so if you're curious about things like EM or things I talk about, I'll have some useful links in there on that page that go with each lesson. So what this is going to do, essentially, quickly, I don't want 16 EM. I want 2.25. And so what that's saying is, well, my base font size is 16. Multiply that for any H1 where I'm using this class by 2.25, which is 36 pixels. So now let's create the next section, which will be for our typography. So I'm just going to do a couple of font sizes here. I'm not going to do too much. So I'm dragging this into my elements panel. We'll name this one section typography. And then for styling, we're going to use that section class that we created just to then give it that padding. So now we'll go back, and then within this section, I want one of my handy containers with the max width. And I like to give pretty descriptive names. I didn't always do this starting out here, but it's useful later once you start doing actions, making sure you know which elements you're putting your actions onto. So hopefully you'll see me do that throughout. But now I can just use this. I can search for my 1140 guy. So let's go pull in a couple of things into this container. We're going to do two headings, an H1 and an H2, because that's all I'm going to use in the app throughout. So just drag again. You'll see the blue when it's in the container that you want. This one we'll call heading H1. Make sure it's an H1. And then on the page, we'll want to write what it is. Actually, let's do H1 heading like this. And then now I can just quickly apply that class I already created. But I also want to give this some space on the left here just to move it into the page so it looks better. So I'm going to do some inline styling here and just add some padding on the left so that it does that. But I'm doing it inline because that's now not part of that utility class. So I don't want this heading pushed into the left everywhere I'm using it throughout the app. Okay, so let's create our H2. We'll add another heading element. And if I drag it into container, by default, it's going to go to the bottom of that container, which is what I want. And we'll call this heading H2, leave it as an H2, give it that text, and then create a new utility class for the H2 that I want. Don't know if I'm being consistent here, whether I put H2 first or not. Create the class, and then I want this to be 1.5 times my base font size of 16, so it should be 24 pixels. So font size 1.5 EM. And then let's do inline again, so these are lined up of that padding left. Getting my numbers confused. All right, now I'm actually going to add a heading to this section and use one of those classes I just created. So within the container, I'm going to put one more heading. It's going to first go to the bottom, but I want it up here. And then I'm going to call this is the typography heading, again being descriptive. I'm going to keep this as an H2, And then I'm going to add two utility classes, that one text-align center that exists and the H2 that I just created.